here and talking first. And she's also alphabetically following the protocol. She should be the first one who's speaking. And also, she's the parliamentary secretary, the one and only that we have in the York region. So if you look at all of those indicators, Leona should be standing up here and talking, and I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to thank her for actually asking me as a guest to open up the session. So thank you, Leona, and thank you all for coming. So I was given about 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about 25 minutes. That's quite typical of me. But before we get into the really detailed, nitty-gritty numbers, I want to do a couple of things. I want to set the stage. I want to take you back about 30 years back and look at some indicators that has taken us to where we are here. Also, I want to look at some of the good news and some of the other indicators that position us for an excellent long-term growth. And combination of those two frame the vision that we have for the government and for the budget. So those indicators coming together will frame the base and the priorities of the government, and then we'll break those priorities, and between Leona and I, we'll cover those priorities in a lot more detail. So just wanted to set the stage. So let's start with talking about what has happened over the last 30 years. So how many of you feel that the cost of living has actually gone down? Good. So the cost of living has gone up. So we're paying a lot more for our food and shelter. We're paying a lot more for childcare, and I see a lot of students here. We are paying a lot more for tuition fee. So there are four elements that usually the government looks at when they look at the indicators for how well our standard of living, the cost associated with the standard of living is, and those are the four indicators. So the cost of living has really gone up. To the same token, we haven't had significant salary raises over the last 30 years. Most of the salary raises hasn't been because you stayed or we stayed in the same job and we grow. Most of it's been that we made a conscious decision to do hopping. So we get some experience and we hop into another organization, another firm, and that's where really the gain in our salaries came. But unfortunately, what has happened is that gain in the salary hasn't kept up with the increased cost of living. In the same time period, what has happened is the household debt has increased. The household debt has increased for a couple of reasons. Number one is we want to maintain that standard of living that we have become accustomed to, and also the interest rates are low. So what we have done, we have taken risk by going and borrowing. In some, the banks and the financial institution has managed to control some of it, but still, if you are within the limits, we are, and all the indicators shows that we have actually borrowed a lot more than what we should be borrowing. Now, our economy has had growth, but the growth has not been, as I call it, it hasn't been a shared growth and it hasn't been a balanced growth. So what does that mean? That means the high income earner, or what we call the rich, has got richer. Well, has got richer. And the low to medium income earner have not kept up with the same rate of growth as the high income earners. Okay? So there are some indicators there, I'm not going to read it to you. What we call the richer have grown high number of folds, 155%, whereas the poorer has only grown 33%. And a lot of that has been because of the jump that they do in the jobs and the salaries. And one of the key indicators that's really impacting us, and it was a wakening call when we looked at the data, was the shift in the demographic. For the first time in 2015, the number of, a portion of our population was 65 and above, equal the number of 14 and years old and younger that we have. Well, what does that mean? That means that we need to start rethinking the way we provide our social services, the way we support our seniors, and also help our young, and look at the skill set demographic we have. Also, it tells us that we don't have as many young people working to be able to support the social infrastructure that we need to be able to deliver for the elders. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So, these were some of the indicators, as I talked about, that what has really happened at a very high level within the economy. Now, we are well positioned. We are well positioned, why? Because there are also some indicators that allows us to, given the right strategy, given the right focus, given the right type of investment, be able to put us in a growth, in a longer growth trajectory. And those indicators are, so we are relatively in a very strong fiscal position as compared to other G7s. And what does it mean? It means that we have what we call a low net debt to GDP ratio. And there are three things here: the net, the debt, the GDP, and the ratio. I'll gladly spend some time with you after to be able to explain the difference between the GDP and the net GDP and all of that. But really, our GDP, debt to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the G7. What does that mean? That means that we can allow and we can make decisions to do strategic investments. We also have low interest rate. We benefited from low interest rate. In one hand, the low interest rate caused some debt to increase, but it also allows us to be able to, given the low debt to GDP ratio, it's going to allow us to be able to go and borrow money and invest strategically in what programs? In the programs that we want. And we also have a very, very highly educated workforce, and we have a highly educated population. What does that mean? That means that it allows us to be able to focus on using the investment into an innovation sector that brings about long-term, well-paying jobs. Okay? And the other element is our corporate tax rates are the lowest among all the developing countries or among the G7 countries. Again, what does that mean? That means that we can invest. So what we are seeing a theme of opportunity to invest, strategic as well as innovation kind of appearing in looking at all of these indicators. Now, the other thing that kind of sets Canada apart from the rest of the world is the concept of its inclusivity. And the concept of inclusivity really comes into the way we do everything. Aside from cultural, we can leverage the same strength that we have into building programs that initiatives that are a lot more inclusive than just looking at from a financial point of view. So this allows us to have an inclusive growth. So when you put all of those elements together, and if we may go to the next slide, please. So what you see the 5 priorities that have shaped for the government. Those priorities really can be summed into about $51.5 billion of investment in this year, and $51.5 billion, and a commitment to reducing our debt to GDP, as well as working toward a balanced budget over the next 5 years. So those 5 priorities are as such. We start with focusing on helping, growing, better future for Indigenous people, clean growth, and an inclusive and fair Canada. So what you see at all of those have come to the 5 priorities for the government. So on helping the middle class, middle income earner, sorry, I used the wrong terminology. I hate using the term middle class. We do a lot of reference to the middle class. I believe anybody who lives in Canada is a first-class citizen. So I like to replace that and use the low and middle income earner and high income earner. So we want to help the middle income earners, and for this year, overall, we are making an investment of about $23 billion. Those helps comes in three forms. There are a group of tax reform, which I will talk in detail a bit more. And there's another big program that deals with Canada Child Benefit, or CCB, and there's a huge investment in making the life of the students better. Remember, highly educated student, making the life better for them. Middle income earner coming in and making the life better for them. And then we talk about the growth strategy. So growth strategy again goes back to all those indicators and why should we focus on the growth. And the growth comes in investment in three different areas. Our physical infrastructure, our social infrastructure, and our green infrastructure. And in a couple of slides, I'm going to break those down for you in more detail. But really, in our investment in the physical infrastructure, the phase one announcement in itself is heavy investment in green transit and social infrastructure. And overall, over the next 10 years, we are committing to about $120 billion. Better future for our indigenous people. Do you remember we talked about the inclusivity? Do you remember we talked about the reconciliation and actually taking care of the group of people who were here first and then we came. Therefore, and what we're doing, we're making about $8.4 billion investment over the next 5 years to start the whole reconciliation process. And I believe the reconciliation will come to building a trust and making sure that we deliver on the investment that we've announced. And the investments are in there as education, infrastructure, and training. Over the next 4 years, we're going to spend about $1 billion in clean growth. And a clean growth is focusing on different industries and also making, delivering on the commitment we made on our environmental commitments. And finally, we want to make sure that we take care of our youth, veterans, and seniors. That's going to be the area that Leona is going to cover. So I'm going to cover probably 1, 2, and a little bit of 3, and Leona is going to cover 3, 4, and I believe 5. So can we go to the next slide, please? So on the health side, what we talked about middle income earners, and we talked about a number of initiatives that's happening. So the first largest initiative that's happening is actually on the CCD, or Canadian Child Benefit, and there are 3 or 4 characteristics about this program. This program is simpler. So for those of you who have children, or you know your sons and daughters who have children, there used to be 3 different programs supporting the child benefits, and now they've been all consolidated into one program. So they made it much simpler. They made it all, the government has also made it tax-free, which means that for some of those benefits, previous benefits, you have to file and pay taxes on those benefits that you receive at the end of the year, and that has been eliminated. So the benefit that's coming to the families with children, and we'll cover the age range, are tax-free. Better targeted. Better targeted means that we're looking at the families who actually need it, rather than the families that do not need it, right? So, and we know the high income earners really do not need to use the child benefit, and there are a lot of other families that are in the lower to middle income earners that they can benefit from a little bit. More generous. So on the more generous side, I like to talk about the different ranges or different classes. So if you are a low and middle income earner and you have a child under age of 6, you can get up to about, I believe, $5,400 a year tax-free. And if you have children between the age of 6 and 17, you can get up to about, I want to get my numbers right. Sorry, so if you have children under age of 6, you're going to get $6,400 per year, and if you have between 6 to 17, it's about $5,400. So when you look at it and averages up, on average, families are going to get $2,300 more a year. Okay, and it's going to impact 9 out of 10 families, and as we talked about in the last slide, the overall investment in there is about $23 billion for this year. So you can see that we are focusing and giving help where we think the help is needed based on all the data. The next area that we focus on the students and on the post-secondary education. So we've done about 4 or 5 things specifically to the post-secondary education. Number one, the grants that were given to the students under the previous government was about $2,000. The grants has gone to $3,000. So we went from $2,000 to $3,000. We also went from $20,000 in income to $25,000 in income before the students has to start paying their OSAP funding. So what we've done, we've increased it by about $5,000. So this helps a lot of students to be able to actually get going before they start paying back. So this is another help that's coming in. We also announced the summer jobs program, and most of you, for those who have businesses that they're hiring younger students, the base budget was actually doubled. So we announced about $300